They laughed at a hungry veteran until his hands revealed a forgotten automotive legend. The afternoon sun poured over the small-town street like honey, warm and golden, softening even the rough edges of the cracked pavement. Shadows stretched lazily from lampposts and storefronts, and the air carried the faint smell of fried food drifting out from the diner on the corner. It was the kind of day when life seemed to slow down, when people lingered a little longer in their conversations, enjoying the last gentle hours before evening dot. But today, something unusual had captured everyone's attention, right in front of the diner. A sleek sports car sat lifeless, its hood propped open, its glossy surface reflecting the curious faces gathered around it. The car was a bold statement in this modest town, too shiny, too polished, too loud for the quiet street. Now stalled and silent, it was little more than a monument to its owner's frustration. The young man who drove it paced restlessly, his expensive sunglasses perched on his head, his shirt crisp and spotless. He wore impatience like a second skin, glancing at his friends for reassurance while muttering curses at the machine that had betrayed him. His friends chuckled, some shaking their heads, others enjoying the chance to see arrogance stumble. Every so often, one of them leaned closer to the car, pretending to offer advice, only to step back with a shrug. None of them knew what they were looking at. The diner doors swung open and shut as waitresses peered out, curious about the commotion. A couple of older men leaned on the railing, chewing toothpicks and swapping stories about back in their day, when cars were built differently, when they were simpler, easier to understand. Someone suggested calling the local mechanic, but even he had wandered over already, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. He looked under the hood for a moment, squinting, then shook his head slowly. "Not a quick fix," he muttered, retreating back into the crowd. Among the laughter, the theories, and the impatience, one figure stood apart. At the very edge of the crowd, barely noticed, lingered a man who seemed almost out of place. His clothes hung loosely on him, faded and ragged, with fabric fraying at the cuffs and collar. His shoes, scuffed and nearly torn through at the soles, told the story of miles walked with no certain destination. A battered backpack sagged against his shoulder, its straps frayed, the faint outline of a military patch still clinging stubbornly to one side. His skin was dark, his beard speckled with gray, and his face carried the weight of years few cared to imagine. Yet it was not his clothes, nor his age that marked him most clearly, it was his eyes. Steady, observant, quiet. They did not dart nervously like those of a man begging for change. They did not look away when met with ridicule. Instead, they lingered on the open hood of the car, studying, remembering, almost as if the machine was whispering something only he could hear. No one paid him any mind at first. A couple of teenagers glanced his way, smirked, and nudged each other, but they quickly turned back to the spectacle of the car. To the crowd, he was invisible, just another weary drifter hovering too close to where he didn't belong. The kind of man people avoided eye contact with, whose presence was tolerated but never welcomed. And yet, while others saw only a broken car and the inconvenience it caused, he seemed to see something else. The way his gaze held on the engine, the subtle shift of his weight as if resisting the urge to step forward. It was different. There was recognition there, a familiarity etched into the furrow of his brow. The sunlight caught in his eyes for a brief moment, and in that glimmer, there was something that didn't match the rest of him. His clothes spoke of hardship, his shoes of wandering, his face of struggle. But his eyes, they spoke of knowledge, of memory, of hands that had once worked not just for survival but for purpose. Still, he stood at the edges, silent, almost blending into the hum of chatter and laughter around him. If anyone noticed him at all, they dismissed him quickly, as if the story unfolding here, the embarrassment of a wealthy young man and his useless sports car, was too entertaining to waste on a shadow at the margins. The homeless man adjusted the strap of his backpack and let out a slow breath. He didn't step forward, not yet. He simply watched, waiting, as if he knew the moment would come when his silence would matter. For now, the crowd laughed, the car remained stubbornly dead, and the afternoon sun spilled across the scene like a spotlight on a stage, where no one realized a hidden character was waiting to enter. The young owner of the car slammed his hand against the hood, the sound sharp enough to silence the murmurs for a moment. His face flushed red, the vein in his neck pulsing with irritation. Useless. He spat, his voice breaking the lazy hum of the afternoon. His sunglasses slipped down the bridge of his nose as he cursed it again, louder this time, as though volume alone might fix what money couldn't. His friends, clustered around him, exchanged looks of thinly veiled amusement. They had come along for the ride, eager to bask in the glow of his wealth and the sleek machine he flaunted through town. Now that same machine sat powerless, turning their laughter into something sharp and mocking. Luxury ride gone silent. One of them muttered under his breath, and the phrase sparked another round of chuckles. Someone pulled out a phone, recording the scene as though it were a comedy worth remembering. The young man's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout at them, but the humiliation was already too heavy. From the edge of the crowd, the local mechanic cleared his throat. His oil-stained cap shaded his eyes as he bent over the engine one last time, then leaned back with a low whistle. "Not a quick fix," he said, shaking his head. His tone was more practical than mocking, but it carried weight nonetheless. "This ain't just a fuse or a battery. Gonna cost more than you think, son. Maybe more than this town can offer on short notice." The car owner cursed again, loud enough for people to turn their heads. He kicked at the tire, frustration spilling over like a child denied his toy. The laughter of his friends only deepened his embarrassment, every chuckle cutting deeper than the last dot, and then, through the noise and ridicule, came a voice. It was not loud, but it carried a strange firmness, like a steady note cutting through a storm. "Can I fix it? If you'll give me something to eat?" Heads turned. The voice belonged to the homeless man who had lingered on the margins. He stood a few steps closer now, one hand resting on the strap of his battered backpack. His clothes hung loose, his shoes nearly falling apart, yet his stance was steady, his gaze fixed on the broken car. His words hung in the air, soft but daring, asking for nothing more than a meal in return for a chance. For a heartbeat, the crowd was silent. And then the laughter came, louder and sharper than before. The young owner barked a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You fix this?" He scoffed, gesturing to the gleaming car. "What do you know about engines? You can barely afford shoes." A couple of teenagers doubled over, clutching their stomachs in exaggerated laughter. A woman in a sundress rolled her eyes. "Here we go again," she whispered to her friend, loud enough for others to hear. "Begging for scraps in exchange. For some miracle trick. Fix it?" Someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "Sure, maybe with duct tape and prayers." More laughter followed. The homeless man didn't flinch. His expression didn't shift with the mockery hurled his way. His eyes, still steady, lingered on the engine, studying it the way an old craftsman studies a familiar puzzle. His words had not been a joke. He had meant them. But to the crowd, he was just another drifter, a man with no past worth knowing and no future worth considering. They saw his ragged jacket, his torn shoes, his sunken cheeks. They heard his request for food and painted him instantly with the brush of desperation. To them, he wasn't a mechanic, a veteran, or even a man with dignity. He was simply a beggar, reaching for whatever he could. And yet, beneath the laughter and dismissive stares, something deeper stirred. The sunlight caught in his calm eyes, and for a fleeting second, there was a sense of quiet defiance there, a silent reminder that appearances deceive. The crowd didn't see it. The young owner didn't care. To them, his words were absurd, laughable, the ramblings of someone with nothing left to lose. But the moment had been set. The line had been drawn. And soon, what they mocked so easily would return to silence their laughter. The laughter slowly died down, replaced by the hum of small-town chatter. Some shook their heads. Others smirked as though the homeless man's words were nothing but background noise. Yet he didn't retreat. Instead, he took one deliberate step closer to the car, his gaze never leaving the dormant engine. The young owner folded his arms, feigning confidence he didn't feel. "All right then," he sneered. "Let's hear it. What's your grand plan, old man? Magic tricks? Or maybe you'll pray it back to life?" The veteran's voice came again, calm and measured, as though the jeers hadn't touched him at all. "Engines don't answer to prayers," he said. "They answer to hands that know them." His eyes flicked briefly to the boy, then to the car, then back to the boy again. "I've worked with machines like this. I know their language." For the first time, silence stretched thin across the crowd. Something about the way he spoke, low, confident, assured, did not fit the image of a beggar. He didn't boast. He didn't plead. He simply stated fact, as though the truth were carved into his bones. The mechanic scratched his chin, narrowing his eyes. He had seen plenty of men bluff their way into odd jobs, but there was something different here. The way the stranger studied the car, the subtle tilt of his head as though listening to a melody no one else could hear. It wasn't the gaze of a man guessing. It was the gaze of someone remembering. Machines don't have a language. The young owner shot back, trying to regain control of the moment. "You're crazy. And even if you could fix it, why would I let some filthy guy with torn shoes lay hands on my car?" A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. It was one thing to laugh at the homeless man. It was another to risk an expensive machine in his hands. No one wanted to see this end in disaster, but still, curiosity lingered. One older man at the edge of the crowd spoke, his voice rough but not unkind. "What makes you think you can fix it? That's not some junkyard truck, it's a piece of foreign engineering." The veteran's eyes softened, though his face remained unreadable. "I know," he said. "I built engines more complicated than this. I've taken apart machines built to fly, machines built to race. To me, this is just a conversation waiting to happen." A murmur spread through the crowd, and for the first time, people hesitated to laugh. His words rang with a conviction that didn't sound borrowed. And when the sunlight caught his hands, scarred, calloused, steady, it was easy to imagine they had once held tools. Not just scraps of survival. Still, skepticism held strong. The car's owner snorted, masking his unease with bravado. "Fine, you want to touch it? Go ahead. But if you break anything, you'll answer for it. And don't think you're getting a free meal just for poking around." The veteran nodded once, without argument. He didn't move immediately. Instead, he crouched beside the hood, resting his hand lightly on the metal as though greeting an old friend. His fingers tapped against the surface, almost rhythmic, as if he were listening to something deep within. A hush fell. The crowd leaned forward, drawn not by spectacle, but by something quieter, more compelling, a mystery they hadn't expected. This was no longer about hunger or pride. It was about the unsettling sense that the man before them was not who they thought he was. The mechanic took a cautious step closer, watching him. There was recognition in his eyes now, though faint, like a memory half recalled. The veteran's lips moved, not in prayer but in calculation. Whispering words only he could understand, numbers, sequences, pieces of knowledge stored far beneath the surface of his weathered frame. The boy's friends, once so eager to laugh, now exchanged uneasy glances. The jeers had quieted. Curiosity had taken root where cruelty once stood. The sun dipped lower, spilling long shadows across the diner's lot. Something about the moment felt heavier than it should have been, as if the air itself knew what was about to unfold. The veteran looked up at last, his eyes steady, a faint spark glowing in their depths. "I'll need a wrench," he said simply. And for the first time no one laughed. The man exhaled slowly, as though steadying himself for something sacred. Then, without a word, he set his backpack down by the curb and rolled up his sleeves. His arms, lean but strong, revealed scars that told their own silent history lines, etched by years of labor, service, and survival. The crowd leaned in, still unsure whether to laugh again or to watch in wary silence. He approached the hood of the stalled car with a kind of reverence, resting his hand lightly on the metal. It was as if he wasn't merely touching steel and chrome, but greeting an old friend. Then, with a nod to the mechanic who had reluctantly handed over a small set of wrenches, the man leaned over the engine. At first, his movements were quiet, almost delicate. He tilted his head, listening, not just with his ears, but with his entire being. He tapped a few parts with the flat of the wrench, the sound ringing differently against each component. He adjusted a wire, twisted a bolt, and ran his fingertips over the battery cables like a pianist brushing keys before a performance. The onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Laughter hovered in some throats, but never came. There was something strangely mesmerizing about the way he moved, like a craftsman falling into rhythm, as if the car were speaking to him in a language long forgotten by others. The young owner scoffed, trying to cover his growing unease. What is he even doing? Tapping things like a drum won't fix an engine. But his voice lacked the confidence it carried before. The mechanic, arms crossed, said nothing. His eyes tracked every movement, every adjustment, and slowly suspicion turned to recognition. This wasn't guesswork, it wasn't luck. The man's hands carried certainty. Within minutes, the pace quickened. The homeless veteran's posture shifted from tentative to commanding, as though the puzzle had unfolded itself in his mind. His hands moved with purpose, loosening a clamp, rerouting a cable, tightening a connection. The motions were fluid, almost too fast for the eye to follow. The crowd leaned closer. Phones that had once been raised to mock were now recording something very different. The smirks that had curled lips earlier began to fade, replaced by furrowed brows and murmurs of surprise. Wait. He actually knows what he's doing, someone whispered. The man didn't look up. Sweat gathered on his brow, catching the golden afternoon light, but his focus was unshaken. With each turn of the wrench, each confident adjustment, he dismantled not just a problem in the engine, but also the prejudice that had painted him as worthless. The young owner shifted from foot to foot, anxiety creeping into his expression. What had started as a spectacle meant to belittle now threatened to expose his own arrogance. His friends grew quieter, their earlier laughter dissolving into silence as the sound of tools clicking against metal became the only rhythm in the air. Finally, the veteran stepped back. He wiped his hands on his worn pants, leaving streaks of grease that only seemed to mark him with more authority than before. Then he nodded once, almost to himself, and motioned toward the driver's seat. Try it now, he said. The young man hesitated, suspicious, but under the weight of dozens of watching eyes. He slid into the leather seat and turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, and then it roared. Not the sputter of a failing machine, not the strained whine of a temporary patch, but a smooth, thunderous roar that spoke of strength restored. The sound filled the diner's lot, echoing against the brick walls, vibrating through the ground. Stronger, smoother, alive again. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He fixed it. Someone murmured, disbelief coloring their tone. No, another corrected softly, shaking their head. He restored it. The mechanic let out a low whistle, his respect clear in his eyes. I've been under hoods most of my life, he muttered, but I've never seen hands move like that. Not at that speed, not with that certainty. The young owner sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel, his pride caught somewhere between awe and shame. His friends stared wide-eyed, their earlier jeers swallowed by the unmistakable truth rumbling beneath the hood. The veteran simply stepped back, his expression unreadable. There was no gloating, no demand for praise. Only quiet dignity, as if What he had done was not a performance for them, but a conversation between him and the machine one that only he could hear. The crowd no longer saw a beggar. They saw something else, though they could not yet name it. A mystery lingered in the air, heavier now than before. Who was this man really? And how could someone the world dismissed so easily carry such command in his hands? The engine purred. On a living testament to the truth no one had expected. And for the first time, the laughter that had filled the street was replaced by silence thick with wonder. The roar of the engine lingered in the air, vibrating through the diner's lot like a held breath finally released. People stood frozen, eyes wide, as though afraid that blinking might undo what they had just witnessed. The young owner sat behind the wheel, stunned, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. He turned toward the man who had just resurrected his pride and joy. His voice cracked when he spoke, the bravado stripped away. How did you do that?" The veteran wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of grease across his temple. He straightened slowly, the weariness of years etched into his posture. For a long moment he said nothing, letting the question hang in the heavy silence. Then, in a voice low but steady, he answered, "I used to build engines like this," he said softly, "before you were even born." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged bewildered glances, others leaned forward as if they might catch more secrets if they listened closely enough. The mechanic, who had been silent until now, let out a sharp breath. He recognized the certainty in that tone, the weight of truth that could not be faked. The young owner blinked, confusion etched across his face. "What are you talking about?" The narrator's voice seemed to echo through the air, weaving the fragments of a forgotten life into something undeniable. Once, this man had not been nameless. He had not been a drifter scorned at the edge of society. Years ago, he had worn a uniform decorated, respected, carrying medals that bore witness to his service as a soldier. He had survived battlefields where others had fallen, his courage shaping victories no one in the crowd could imagine. And when war ended, he had not simply vanished into obscurity. He had turned his hands, the same scarred hands that now gripped a simple wrench, toward creation instead of destruction. He became one of the pioneering minds in automotive engineering. His fingerprints were etched invisibly into innovations still used in cars today. Systems refined, designs perfected, ideas that others profited from while his name slipped into footnotes. But history has a cruel way of forgetting its heroes. Over the years, hardships crept in: personal loss, betrayals, the quiet erosion of recognition. As new faces took credit, his faded. As industries grew wealthier, he was left behind. A society he had fought for, a world he had helped build, had turned its back. Until all that remained was a man with weary eyes, walking the streets with nothing but memory and skill carried deep in his bones. The truth hung heavy in the silence. The homeless veteran standing before them was no beggar chasing scraps. He was once a builder of legends, a man whose hands had touched history. The young owner stumbled out of the car, his earlier arrogance melting into something unsteady, almost childlike. His voice faltered. "You mean, you're the reason. This car even..." He stopped, unable to finish, his pride shattered beneath the weight of what he now understood. The mechanic nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the man with a respect that bordered on reverence. "I've read about him," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I never thought." The veteran lowered his gaze, his expression calm but tinged with sadness. "Doesn't matter much now," he murmured. "The world forgets. People move on. But the crowd couldn't move on, not yet. Their laughter, their mockery, now felt like a wound they had inflicted on themselves. The same man they had dismissed as worthless had just revealed a brilliance that dwarfed their narrow judgments. In that moment, the diner lot felt transformed. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden streaks across the pavement, as though even the light itself paused to honor him. What stood before them was not just a homeless man. It was a living reminder of society's blindness, how easily greatness could be discarded, how cruelly the hands that built a better future could be left empty. The engine continued to purr behind them, steady and strong, its rhythm a testament to the truth revealed, and the crowd silent now, humbled, could only watch, hearts heavy with the realization of who they had just witnessed. The engine's steady hum faded into the background, but the silence around it was deafening. Where moments earlier the diner's lot had echoed with laughter and taunts, now there was only the weight of shame pressing down on every heart. No one dared to meet the man's eyes. People shifted uneasily, glancing at the ground, fidgeting with their phones, wishing they could swallow back the cruel words they had so casually tossed his way. The young car owner stood rigid, the flush of arrogance drained from his face. He held his wallet in trembling hands, pulling out bills as though the gesture might erase the sting of what had just unfolded. He stepped toward the veteran, voice faltering. "Here," he said softly, "take this, for fixing it. It's the least I can do." The man looked at the money, then at the boy holding it. His expression was unreadable, neither anger nor bitterness, but something deeper, calmer. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. His voice was steady, carrying more strength than the crowd had expected. "I don't want your money. Just what you promised." The boy blinked, caught off guard. The meal?" The veteran gave a single nod. "That'll be enough." For a moment, the boy seemed unsure of what to do. Then, wordlessly, he lowered the money and turned toward the diner. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a paper bag, the smell of hot food drifting out to mix with the thick evening air. He handed it over without a word. The veteran accepted it gently, as though even this simple exchange carried weight. Then he walked to the steps of the diner and sat down, his movements slow but deliberate. He opened the bag, pulled out a sandwich and a small container of fries, and began to eat. He didn't rush. He didn't wolf down the food like someone desperate. Instead, he ate quietly, with a kind of dignity that made every bite feel sacred. Each chew seemed to echo in the silence, a reminder that this man had asked for nothing more than the barest kindness and had still been ridiculed for it. The crowd lingered, watching. Some looked away in shame, unable to face the weight of their own cruelty. Others stared at him with new eyes, the pieces of his story fitting together in their minds, reshaping their understanding of the man they had dismissed. The mechanic leaned against the diner's wall, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving the veteran. He had worked on cars for decades, but never had he felt as humbled as he did now. He shook his head softly, muttering to himself, "We mocked a legend, right here on our doorstep." The young owner stood apart from his friends, shoulders slumped. The laughter they once shared had vanished, leaving only awkward silence between them. He glanced at the man on the steps, guilt burning his cheeks. For the first time, he saw him not as a beggar, but as someone whose worth was far beyond money, someone he could never hope to measure against. Children who had clung to their mothers earlier now watched curiously, no longer fearful but strangely in awe. Their mothers hushed them, though their own faces bore the sting of regret. The veteran kept eating, his posture straight, his presence calm. He asked for nothing more. No applause, no recognition, no validation. He was a man who had done what he promised, then claimed only what he needed. And somehow that quiet act carried more weight than any speech could. The setting sun painted the lot in gold, stretching shadows long across the pavement. The purr of the car behind them faded as the engine was switched off, but its memory lingered, mingling with the unspoken thoughts of everyone gathered. For the first time, the people who had mocked him weren't thinking about his ragged clothes or his worn shoes. They were thinking about the scars on his arms, the calm in his voice, the brilliance in his hands. They were thinking about how close they had come to missing the truth entirely. The diner's neon sign flickered on, buzzing softly in the background. The veteran finished his sandwich, folded the wrapper neatly, and set it back in the bag. He leaned back against the steps, closing his eyes for a brief moment, as though savoring not just the food, but the simple dignity of being seen finally. If only for a fleeting evening. The crowd stood still, their reflections heavy. None dared laugh again, and in that quiet, the lesson began to take root. The last light of day stretched thin across the diner lot, painting the cracked pavement in hues of amber and rose. The hum of conversation had long since faded, leaving only the quiet shuffle of feet and the distant hum of cicadas rising with the evening. The man sat on the diner steps, his empty paper bag beside him, his posture steady and composed. The crowd lingered, not because they had anything left to say, but because walking away felt impossible. They had seen something that unsettled them, something that peeled back the shallow layers of their own judgments and left them bare. The narrator's voice seemed to rise gently from that silence, soft yet steady, carrying the weight of a truth that could not be ignored. Greatness does not always wear fine clothes or live in big houses. It does not always drive cars with polished chrome or wear watches that gleam in the sun. Sometimes greatness walks among us in tattered shoes and faded jackets, carrying its legacy not in outward signs of wealth, but in the quiet strength of memory, skill, and sacrifice. The people who had laughed only an hour before now stood in the presence of a man who had carried brilliance in his hands, who had fought battles both in war and in life, who had built machines that others could only marvel at. And yet, because his body bore the marks of hardship, because his life had been worn down by neglect, they had mistaken him for nothing. Sometimes, those dismissed as nobodies carry stories of sacrifice, genius, and resilience. They carry scars that are not weaknesses but testaments to survival. They carry knowledge that once shaped the very world others take for granted. Their silence is not emptiness, it is history waiting to be remembered. The veteran had not shouted his truth. He had not demanded recognition. He had simply shown them who he was through action, through the calm certainty of hands that had once built the future. And in doing so, he revealed not only himself but also the blindness of those who had mocked him. The narrator's voice softened even further, almost like a whisper meant for the heart more than the ear. True respect is not given to appearances. It is owed to humanity itself. Every person, no matter their station, carries worth beyond what the eye can see. To laugh at another's suffering is to laugh at our own ignorance. To dismiss someone for what they lack is to risk missing the immeasurable treasure of who they truly are. On the diner steps, the man gathered his bag and stood. He did not linger for thanks or acknowledgement. He simply nodded once, a gesture both humble and resolute, and began to walk down the quiet street, his figure outlined in the fading glow of dusk. The crowd parted silently to let him pass. No one jeered, no one spoke. They only watched, their eyes lowered, their hearts heavy with a new understanding that would not leave them soon. For in that single afternoon, they had been taught a lesson not by lecture, not by punishment, but by truth revealed in the simplest way. A man, a broken engine, and the undeniable power of dignity. And as the last sound of his footsteps faded, the truth remained. Greatness lives among us still. It does not always shine where we expect, but it is always worth honoring when it is found.